Greetings, everyone. Greetings and welcome to the Post-Covidian Complex. Where do we go from here? A policy discussion hosted by the Academy of Arts, Letters, Culture, and Public Affairs at the University of Trinidad and Tobago. We had originally planned on hosting this webinar on a different date, but a confluence of various streams of consciousness and circumstance led us to this day. And it's interesting that in the midst of all our planning, we did not recognize the significance of the moment, even as we remain immersed in a world that's forever changed. Today, we recognize in Trinidad and Tobago the Labor Day public holiday, a date on which we recount the struggles, celebrate the triumphs, and refocus on the road ahead, primarily for our working class. In the United States of America, the epicenter of so much that has captured the collective consciousness in these past few months, the emancipation of the last remaining enslaved Africans is being recognized through the celebration of Juneteenth. As we gather this morning to discuss the future of Trinidad and Tobago's carnival, it occurred to us that this confluence referred to earlier is meant to remind us that Carnival is born out of similar struggles. And so we recall Samora Machel and utter those timeless words, "A luta continua," the struggle continues. We at the Academy's Master of Arts in Carnival Studies are committed to spreading the gospel of Carnival, recognizing the salient role it has played and must play in ensuring Victoria y cierta, that victory is certain. And on that note, I hand you over to our moderator for this webinar, Carnival Studies alum and current doctoral candidate, Lamar Pollard. Lamar is a festival and event professional with over 15 years in the carnival industry. His ongoing doctoral work focuses on carnival policy. He is currently working at the UTT Academy for the Performing Arts as production manager and also lectures on event management related courses. Good morning, Lamar.
Good morning, Keron, and thank you for that hearty introduction. Welcome to all our viewers. With us today, we have Dr. Suzanne Burke, lecturer in the Department of Literary, Cultural, and Communication Studies at the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine. Also from the University of the West Indies, St. Augustine, we have Dr. Keron Niles, lecturer with the Institute of International Relations. We also have with us Dr. Kim Johnson, filmmaker and director of the Carnival Institute of Trinidad and Tobago. And rounding off this panel, we have Dr. Rudolph Ottley, author and assistant professor with the Academy of Arts, Letters, Culture, and Public Affairs at the University of Trinidad and Tobago. Panelists, welcome. Just a bit of housekeeping for the viewers. There will be a brief Q&A segment at the end of the discussion. So please send your questions as comments via the chat function in Facebook or on YouTube, or email them to theacademy@utt.edu.tt. That's the academy@utt.edu.tt. Okay, so today's webinar, the focus of today's discussion is the issue of policy as it pertains to Carnival. Undoubtedly, the whole issue of reform and transformation is one that has come to the fore in the era of COVID. And it's important, we at the UTT believe that it's important to, we thought it was important to begin a discussion on the issue of policy as it pertains to Carnival. When we speak about policy for Carnival, we're speaking about a specific range of documents. We are speaking about the National Carnival Commission Act of 1991, which established the formation of the Carnival Commission, whose job was to focus, in summary, on the industrialization and heritage preservation of the festival. We're also speaking about the Cabinet Note, the Cabinet Minute of 1997, which reshaped the roles of some of the key stakeholders in Carnival, namely the special interest groups responsible for Mass, Pan, and Calypso. Because initially the National Carnival Commission Act had them in a less dominant role as it pertains to being arbiters of their own future and making decisions that they felt were in their best interest. They were more consultants on the board, and the cabinet notes kind of changed the dynamic of power within the management of Carnival. And the last document is the another cabinet note which led to the formation of the Carnival Institute of Trinidad and Tobago. But the thing about it is the NCC Act is 29 years old, and the cabinet note is 23 years old. And though the festival has evolved significantly since that time, there have been no reform initiatives involving the main policies for Carnival. So I'd like to kind of kick off the discussion by directing this question to Suzanne, to Dr. Burke. Is it time for reform of policy within the Carnival? And if so, what areas do policy stakeholders need to take into consideration moving forward?
Okay, thank you so much, Lamar. And I want to congratulate UTT on initiating this very important conversation, which I hope will continue. I wanted to kind of recontextualize the question you're asking me, because you're really asking, I think, if I interpret it properly, is that how does policy facilitate a festival? Yes? How does policy, engender the kind of transformation and change that festivals are supposed to do? And I want to, of course, refer to the literature first on festivals, and the festivals that are sustainable, because what you're really asking about is the sustainability of the festival and how the policy can actually sustain Carnival as we would like it to be. And the key characteristics of a sustainable festival are: one, the festival has to remain relevant. And when we say that, we mean both socially, economically, and politically. So it has to connect on all those three levels for relevance to continue to happen. The second characteristic that I want to talk about is related to the first, in that to remain relevant, festivals have to be adaptable to the locales in which they were created. They have to be flexible, dynamic, and innovative. And in that sense, the policy has to ensure that those things happen. Festivals that are sustainable are also open to the world, in that even though they are created in specific locations and places and have particular histories and so on, they have to be able to resonate with persons and places outside of where they're created. And then the other thing is about the reputation of festivals. So for festivals to be sustainable, they have to be consistently performing at a high level. Yeah, so that strong reputation happens. These things then need to be supported by a mixed funding approach, so that you do not want to end up in a situation, as we see in the literature, of what we call resource dependency. So festivals that are resource dependent, meaning that they are dependent on limited sources of finance, are the festivals that we find are not sustainable, right? If a festival is sustainable, it's able to attract multiple sources of funding. So that's the thing that supports festivals. And the other thing that is critically important for us as we discuss the Act and the Cabinet note is the administrative support that kind of actualizes or operationalizes the vision and the philosophy of the festival, the sustainability of the festival. So in that sense then, we look at the actual documents that you talk about. And we know that in the 23 years and the 29 years since those were created, the dynamic of Carnival has changed. So the first thing I want to allude to is the three interest groups. So we have for a very long time, certainly in 1991, the three major activities that took place in Carnival that I guess we represented, or we came to know, defined a Trinidad style Carnival by Mass, Calypso, and Pan. Yes? And those interest groups are actually named in the Act as the key actors and activities that make our carnival distinct. Since that time, we know that that dynamic has changed. So we did a public survey in 2017, 2018 that showed that the majority of people in Trinidad and Tobago define the major activities in carnival as fetting. So fets were the key thing that people engaged in and that they related to in terms of carnival. And that aspect specifically is just one of the activities and actors that are not mentioned in the Act. So that's one thing. So there's a changing dynamic. There's also a changing financial support system, so that we know that the majority of the government, the state, acts as a facilitator in terms of infrastructure. More and more people want to go to events that are spectacular, and events therefore becoming more and more expensive to produce because people want to have this amazing experience in festivals and so on, which therefore almost means that we have got to increase the kinds of financial assistance that are attached to the carnival. And so the importance of the policy specifically incentivizing other kinds of financial support for the festival becomes critical. The third thing I want to talk about is the actual movement of the locales where Carnival is actually celebrated. So in 91 and in 97, we still had a kind of focus on Carnival being an urban celebration, even though, so Port of Spain, San Fernando, Arima, Scarborough, Roxborough, etc. But we now know that since that time, the Carnival has become, in that sense, more of a national celebration. So there are more activities happening in communities. And I think as we enter the discussion and talk about COVID and place and space, issues of safety and security, we find that there may be movement away from the urban centers into communities. And that is something that I think, even though the policy discreetly says something about regions and so on, I think we need to revisit more specifically this notion of supporting celebrations within communities. And I want to also talk about what I feel is a gaping kind of silence in the policy vis-a-vis the environmental impacts of festivals, so that we know that festivals now have an impact, both positive and negative, on the environment. And so, when we are hosting huge events like Carnival, there's urban renewal, we paint things, we put up stands, etc. But we also know that festivals have a very deleterious effect on communities in which they are staged, in terms of noise, in terms of waste, in terms of traffic, all those kinds of things. And even though in the past couple of years, we have seen various attempts to look at the greening of the carnival in that sense, we don't have a cogent and cohesive environmental approach to staging the festival. And the last thing I'd like to say is this notion of the growth of the overseas carnivals. So the Act talks about marketing of the festival in other locales and so on. But we know that since 91 and 97, we have seen the growth of Trinidad Styles Carnival in the Caribbean diaspora. If my memory serves me correctly, by 91, we probably had about 20 something overseas carnivals. Now we are tipping around somewhere around 63, it changes. But what it means, therefore, is that there is an opportunity not just to market Trinidad. And so, therefore, the Tourism Authority is not the only authority implicated in assisting or collaborating with these actors in the overseas carnivals to help with the branding of Trinidad and Tobago as a destination. But we also know that culture, and more specifically festivals, are a tool in soft diplomacy. So the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and so on have to also be on board. We also know that there are trade and legal issues in terms of the export of products and services. And of course, now we know that our entrepreneurs and practitioners find work and find opportunity for their creativity in these carnivals. So it's not just an overseas circuit for audiences, it's an overseas circuit for people who are creators. And so issues of economics, trade, IP, work visas, all of those things have to also be considered in the policy. So yes, there are many gaps. And I think this is really a great time for us to rethink and restart the festival, not just as a particular organization facilitating, but as a country on a whole. How do we create a carnival policy that facilitates the various ways in which carnival is celebrated in Trinidad and Tobago and its diaspora? We're not hearing you, Lamar.
Oh, sorry about that. Thanks a lot, Dr. Burke. Very packed, and I like the idea of the 3 pillars you spoke of. You spoke of 3 pillars. One, the first being relevance, social, economic, political. You spoke of adaptability. And you also spoke of sustainability, which I think you were speaking about at the tail end of your comments just now. I want to redirect this to Keron in particular. Keron, how can policy be developed or designed, or what steps should we take to ensure that the whole idea of sustainability and greening the festival becomes a more significant part of the whole idea of festival management, etc., with the carnival?
Well, again, good morning, and thanks so much to UTT for having me on. Thanks again to anybody, to everybody listening, for taking the time to be here. Happy Labor Day, everyone. And of course, it's a special day, Juneteenth, very important day. I want us to take a little step back. And I mean, in terms of moving carnival policy forward, Suzanne did an excellent job kind of summarizing all the things that we need to take into account. But we need to take a step back and realize that we don't yet have a cultural policy, right? So cultural policy in the country is an issue, and there have been many iterations of draft cultural policies. Now we have a green paper that's available. That was developed after about a year of advice and input.
2 years, Keron, 2.
I was trying to be diplomatic. Okay, 2 years. I don't want to lie. 2 years. Oh my gosh. And well, first of all, let me just say, like, I don't want people to say, "Oh, he writes it." No, stop that. I definitely had input, but I mean, the authorities make the final decisions as it relates to what's in the document. But the part of the issue is this: we don't like these discussions, and let me just be very real about it, right? We don't like discussions about what is our culture, what is the significance of our culture, what it means to us, and what it should mean to the world, and what does it mean in terms of our identities. These are hard discussions, and it's part of the reason that we don't have I'm just going to call it out. It's part of the reason that we don't have cultural recognition policies yet. It's part of the reason that we don't have heroes, national heroes, which is part of the reason that we're one of the few islands in the region that don't have faces on their dollar notes. One of the next locations that has a unique distinction is Guyana. And because race is an issue. And if you think about who we want to honor, who we want to highlight, who you want to spotlight, and how you want to have this conversation, culture policy has to kind of give you a framework to have that discussion. And that's a hard discussion that no one really wants to have, which is why we're having a sliver of the conversation, a side conversation about one statue, when it's really a question about heritage policy and how we want to tell our own story. And Carnival draws that into stark contrast, for sure. Because there are certain imperatives as it relates to Carnival that we don't really want to talk about in terms of really envisioning Carnival as a national festival. And really talking about our national festivals and having festival policy, right? Those are hard discussions I realize in this country so far, right? About greening the festival, therefore, we have to, I think part of the conversation is this, right? Suzanne touched on the fact that there are serious environmental implications. I remember when somebody tried to stand behind a truck when they were paving the savannah, if you guys remember that, and ended up getting some gravel on him, which is an understatement. You know, they were protesting because of the environmental impacts of even the grandstand. But if you think about it, we are reliant on about 37,000 people, approximately, give or take, every year, coming in to see Trinidad and Tobago Carnival, right? What does that mean in the age of climate change awareness? Do we expect people to keep making these long haul flights to Trinidad to experience our carnival into the next decade or 2 decades? Do we think that that is sustainable? Question number one, it might be a threat, but it's also an opportunity. Is that also an opportunity for us to say, okay, you don't have to leave your country for you to engage in carnival? Might sound radical now, but if people are getting really serious about climate change, then can we then say, listen, stay where you are, we are coming to you? Is that going to be more sustainable in the long run because of the climate change impacts of the long haul flights? Just some food for thought. If you really take into account the environmental impacts of the festival. And I mean, really and truly, environmental impacts in terms of greening is one thing, but we have another. Greening also, when we use the term greening, by the way, I know people get visions of tree huggers, right? But when we use the term greening, we're actually talking about environmental sustainability, economic viability, and social inclusion. How well do we do that right now? And that's a question. And also in terms of the owners of capital as it relates to Carnival, in terms of who makes money and who doesn't, who profits and who doesn't, where are the resources placed and where are they not placed? You know, I mean, if you want to get really dig into social inclusion, how are different groups represented in Carnival? Was you of women in Carnival? These are all the kind of questions that we need to think about really deeply, because if you think about it, right? So right now, from the data that I've seen, I looked a little bit closely at 2016, 2017 Carnival. It's kind of looking forward to this discussion, right? If you look at those 2 years, this was an example case study. The most amount of money when tourists come here, they spend more money, the most amount of money on entertainment. No surprise there, right? Entertainment and then accommodation, right? So they spend most amount of money on entertainment. Of that entertainment spend, over 40% of it goes to fats, over 40% of it goes to costumes, masks, right? 1% of it goes to shows, approximately. Just around 1% of it goes to our wonderful traditional carnival shows. Now that includes your tents, that includes your panorama, that includes your, your Dimanche Gras. And the question is this, when we having those events, are we having it for us? Or are we having it to attract the tourist dollars when they come in? Who is it for? And I feel like that has to be a part of the carnival policy conversation, because it's also a part of a conversation about how we portray ourselves to the world. Who are we inviting into these spaces? If you want tourists to come into these spaces to really showcase ourselves, do we want the events to start at 3 p.m. and finish at 3 a.m.? It's just a question. Is that what that demographic of people are going to really be drawn to? The question is, therefore, when it comes to carnival policy, and you're looking at these 3 things, right? And that's why I left the economic sustainability for the last, right? One of the things that is really important when it comes to carnival, and one of the reasons why government supports it, to the tune of over $100 million every year, the allocations have gone down since 2015 from about 300 million to now just over 100 million. But, and that's just the NCC, by the way, but we spend a lot more money than that on carnival. You can ask me about that later on in the conversation. But if we're going to spend $100 million every year, because one of the reasons that the government is spending it on is, well, there are 2 main reasons. One is cultural heritage, and the next one is in foreign exchange. Because there's so much talk now about diversification, which is extremely important, the foreign exchange earnings are going to become more and more important. Therefore, in terms of the economic viability, dimension of greening an economy, how are we doing so far when it looks at carnival? Like, what are people spending their money on? And we already know the answer, right? We know they're spending their money on fats. We know they're spending their money on costumes, right? And the state needs to ask itself, when it makes investments directly, like in stuff like the Marshka, like in stuff, like even in supporting tents, does it or does it not expect a return on investment? And if so, that's okay, but we just need to know, and we need to decide. And if it's both and, which I think it is, I think it's both cultural heritage and I think it is economic viability. We need to have a conversation about that. But I think it's a wider conversation about our approach to festivals on the whole and our approach to conversations that we don't like to have. We want to have a side discussion about the statue. We don't really want to talk about who our heroes are and who really should be there, right? And so the same thing with Carnival, right? I don't want you to take a minor look at just, oh, it's about the Marshka, it's about Panama. Yes, there might be problems, and there are problems with the economic sustainability, in my opinion, of some of those products, particularly because I'm into music, because I work with Freetown. I'm into music in a big way and I love it. And I'm not gonna lie, I am concerned about the viability, the economic viability and sustainability of Calypso as an art form. And I also have concerns about how we project it to the world. And those are two concerns. One is the cultural heritage concern and one is the economic viability concern. And I think those are valid concerns simply because, and let me just state my position early in the conversation. The bag of money syndrome, where we have this one bag of money that everybody is chasing, and if you don't get into the finals, you're taking NTCs to court. I don't know if that's going to really secure the sustainability of carnival arts or of Calypso. Let me just be very real. It might be good for Calypsonians that win. I just don't know if it's good for Calypso as an art form. These are the conversations that I feel that we need to have if we're talking about the future of Carnival and the future of Carnival policy, particularly in a post-COVID kind of circumstance where you now know that it's really important for us to make this festival a whole lot more resilient. Because right now, a lot of the support is going, well, a lot of the spend of visitors, this is the kind of economic angle, is going towards fats and costumes. A lot of the government spend is going on other things like shows. We need to really think through the entire picture. And I think Suzanne is dead on the money in terms of talking about the fact that we need to really go back into this issue and really revise Carnival policy, and update it. Yeah.
So, thanks a lot, Keron. There were two things that you said, and I saw Kim wants to say something, but just give me a second, Kim, and I'll redirect you shortly. Keron, you made a point of, you were speaking about tourism and the whole issue of, as it pertains to greening the festival, do we want to have thousands of foreigners come into the country every year for the next few decades if we really want to consider, the footprint, the carbon footprint, or just the whole idea of, greening the festival? And I feel as though that's a serious indictment of the whole concept of tourism. But we'll move forward on that. And the next thing is that I get the impression that a lot of what you're saying here, and also as a continuation from what Dr. Burke was saying, is that we need to rethink what the festival means to the people. Because again, even when the act was formed, the way the policy was set up, it kind of set in motion events that framed what is important in the festival. Pan, Mass, and Calypso, and the whole idea of competition. But I just want to hear what Kim has to say. Kim has a comment.
Well, my first point, and you'll have to excuse me because I lost internet for a while. So I didn't hear all of what Suzanne said and only the end of what Keron said. So I hope I'm not being redundant. But at the beginning, Suzanne, she listed three things that we have to bear in mind. The politics, the social, I've forgotten the third. But I thought it was significant that she didn't talk about the culture. Now, she might have sort of skirted around that in her later conversation, and Keron does. But I think a huge problem in policy in general in Trinidad is that we do it without understanding what we write in the policy about, what we coming up with the policy about. And in the case of Carnival, I think in all of the three dimensions, Mass, Pan, and Kaiso, there's a sort of rum shop definitions and rum shop ideas, and even rum shop ideas of tourism. I mean, for example, I've been arguing for years that one of the best forms of tourism is educational tourism. We are the mecca of Pan. People come all over the world, We have two university PAN programs at UTT and UE, and yet still we have not found a way to develop that so that people come here to study PAN. Right now, the main place people go, including Trinidadians, go to study PAN is in NIU, where the Antigua is, Northern Illinois University. And that, I see, if you want to talk about tourism, just, you come down for 2 days and you wine and party and you go to the beach and you do whatever else. I don't think that's the direction we have to look at. I mean, you're talking about carbon footprint. Somebody comes down for 3 years is a horse of a different color. I think to just conceptualize the music, which is 2/3 of Carnival, the calypso, stroke, soca, and the pan. There is no understanding of that. It is just a lot of the conversation I find, and this includes a lot of the academic conversation, is just pitched at the level of rum shop talk. And I mean, at the Carnival Institute, we've tried to introduce discussions. We've tried to introduce discussions even at the NCC, which is our parent body. And there's kind of complete indifference about that. You have someone who, who knows about pan, or who knows as a practitioner about calypso or about pan, but a deep understanding, a deep historical and sociological and anthropological understanding is completely missing. And I find that especially so of economists who see, figures, like the matrix, they see the figures. What Carnival means is not just we like it or we don't like it. Just as it's like, for instance, people talk about Carnival and they think about Carnival weekend and Carnival Monday and Tuesday. But as Suzanne pointed out, the fetes, which in some cases start from September, if that is the central part of Carnival, then Monday and Tuesday is just a small part of it. So there has to be a reconceptualization before we think about policy and try to arrive at a deeper understanding. And that deeper understanding, I think, can place Trinidad centrally, because it's significant that carnivals have spread all over the world under the inspiration of Trinidad Carnival. Why is that? I mean, people just see it happen, like God is a Trini. What is specific about the Trinidad Carnival that makes it so amenable to being transplanted, in Sweden, in Switzerland, and wherever? And if you look at the panoramas, that increases in numbers considerably. No, there is no specific attempt to answer that question. But again, I've argued for ages that we have been, with greater or lesser success, managing Carnival for a very long time. You could say a century, at least. If people are setting up carnivals all over the world, we should be the consultants. We are the ones. I mean, people already recognize Peter Minshall as a consultant in setting up a huge work of art that involved very many people. Similarly, our organizers, our everything, we should be the consultants. And part of the problem is we have this limited idea of Carnival and we have a kind of lack of self-confidence. We are the Mecca of Pan. I think with a little effort and a little imagination and perhaps a little work, we could become the Mecca of modern popular music. Because in some ways, Pan is, you might say, almost the most radical form of popular music there is in the world today. Because it is the one form of popular music that invites people to participate, not buy a CD or download it and you are a passive consumer, which is how music has gone in the 20th century. Pan still invites you to come and be part of it. Even if you're drinking a Benny Panyard and you're pushing a pan, you are part of making the music. And that is so radical. That goes against all of the commercialization of popular music that has happened over the past, 100 years since the birth of recorded music. So we are at the forefront of many things, and we just don't have a combination of the imagination or the understanding and the self-confidence to do it. I proposed this. I remember when I mentioned that in an NCC meeting, the chairman of the NCC behaved as if I was making a joke. You already think that? Ha ha ha. Boy, what an eccentric idea. It's funny, yeah? And that is the kind of jackassness that goes on. Because we pitch everything at the level of rum shop talk. My opinion, your opinion. The truth is, I would not venture to suggest a policy on pan without a detailed study. I've done a detailed study for many years, but I would still want to focus on that, focus on a policy before I venture on it. And I don't know, I'm against the idea of people writing policies on anything, crime, education, whatever, from a position of ignorance and rum shop talk.
Thanks a lot, Kim. Thanks a lot. And I agree, we should not engage in the whole idea of policy, to use your term, from the perspective of rum shop talk. And one of the earlier points you mentioned was the whole idea of educational tourism. And I just want to focus on the word education. I feel as though what I'm hearing from the three panelists who have spoken thus far, that we're talking about a sense of identity, what is important, designing policy or making plans based on data and from an informed perspective. So what I want to direct to Dr. Ottley is, how does the whole idea of education fit into this? As you know, assistant professor at UTT in the Carnival Studies program, how does education play a role in this? And more importantly, I feel as though there's no thread running across the various, the different levels of education: primary, secondary, tertiary, etc. How does education play a role, starting with primary school education all the way up to tertiary education, in solving some of these problems of identity and knowing what we want the carnival to be?
Okay, thanks again for allowing me into the discussion. To all the viewers, welcome to this morning's session. When we talk about the whole concept of education, and if we have, I'm sure we have done a review of the NCC Act, we'll see education and training are obviously not included in the Act. So to answer your question, immediately one was wonder why those particular components of learning, of development, were ignored. The second thing is that when we talk about education in terms of carnival, and I know lately there's been this drive to have calypso in the schools and those kind of things, we need to focus on, even before we get to the education in the school system, what were the thinking behind the acts that govern carnival? And if we go back to historical times, and even that division between the CDC and the NCC, what motivated the governance of that day to change the act? And I'm saying this to contextualize the fact that, was it almost like emancipation that the government of the day said, we are going to free ourselves of this responsibility of carnival and give it to these interest groups? And to give it to the interest groups without the interest groups having any particular competency or skills in terms of governance, in terms of business, in terms of marketing. And so I feel basically that there was a sense of withdrawal from a responsibility that they didn't want to accept. As a result, we have had carnival being watered down, whereby each interest group is now pursuing his or her own interests at the expense of the product we call carnival. And to link it back to the school system, from our experience at UTT, people come to carnival, the carnival program, to learn about how to teach their children about making masks. Little or no interest is shown as to how this carnival, this thing we call carnival, evolved. Whether we're going to propagate the whole question of the 1783 French arrival, or we're going to talk about the African early involvement in carnival, those issues seldom come up. And therefore, to add to what Dr. Burke was saying earlier on, it appears that the carnival is basically just to fet and to have a good time. There's simply no particularly sustained, organized program to show where carnival is an educational aspect, or there's a need to educate the society on the values of carnival, both in terms of developmental, sociological, political, financial, business. The whole gamut of social institutions, carnival could be aligned to with specific programs to show its importance and its historical link to development in TNT. But we have ignored it. And I'm saying by forming more policies, we are further separating that link of learning and academics from Carnival, because it now becomes almost like a doing thing. You go to Carnival, you dance, you whine, and you jump up, you play pan, you sing calypso, and you go home. Without trying to understand why am I going to these fetes? Why am I playing mass? Why do I play with tribe as opposed to another band? Those are the kind of issues through education, one will be able to get a clear understanding of Carnival. And without understanding the importance of Carnival, whatever policy or policies we develop will become irrelevant to the success or the sustainability of Carnival. And if I must just make a point here, even the composition of the organizers of Carnival, we could do a comparative analysis. Before 1991, CDC ran Carnival in a broad sense of the Carnival. Interest groups kind of reported to CDC, and they were, and in other words, their say was determined by CDC. CDC took control. So if there was a problem in Carnival, CDC took control of the issue and the problem and the results. As we exist, who is responsible for Carnival in a real sense? The document says very clearly, yes, the NCC is responsible for marketing and research and all of these things. When there's a fiasco in a calypso tent or a mass band or an Spaniard, who is responsible? We then say it's the interest groups. And therefore the interest groups will now have to take responsibility, and then you take that mode and you move from that mode to the NCC. So there are too many channels. There are too many channels and too many different interests being pursued in terms of Carnival. So, and I will want to, in my humble way, say that until we get back to the point whereby the Carnival comes under an umbrella, whereby one body is responsible for Carnival, we are going to go wrong in these discussions. And to make it, and to add to it, the interest groups, as I said before, when they were given that autonomy, there was no attempt to ensure that they had the requisite competencies, personnel, whatever, to ensure that it was done in a professional, structured way. And what has happened, the interest groups have now developed very egotistical approaches to doing things, very self-centered interests, and therefore, in spite of and despite their challenges of management, they refuse to encourage and expand or explore other managerial skills that are available to them. And therefore, they continue in a particular way, whereas the NCC and Carnival goes in a different direction. So I think it's more than just education in that sense. It is a sense of, first of all, understanding what is Carnival, not only from a historical perspective, but from a sociological, political perspective, economic perspective, and then getting it into the system as a subject, as a subject whereby a compulsory subject as opposed to an elective. Thank you.
Thanks a lot for those words, Dr. Ottley. I want to redirect to Dr. Burke, who has something to respond with.
Great, thanks. I just wanted to remind all of us that in terms of policy, we are discussing 3 documents, but policy is not really enshrined in a document. Policy is what we do or what we choose not to do. Yes, and that has to be seen in the context of the complexity, what we call the Trinidad and Tobago Carnival Complex. And I mean, I have had this discussion with many of my colleagues in that you have to acknowledge that there are many carnivals, yes, that are happening together in this complex. So I say that in my estimation, there are 3 carnivals. There's Carnival of the State, which is what we're talking about in terms of the NCC and their role in terms of facilitating certain things. There's a business interest of Carnival, yes, and there's a Carnival of the people. And those 3 operate in tandem and sometimes in tension, sometimes they collaborate with each other. So any policy has to acknowledge the various ways in which Carnival happens, right? And Carnival will happen, as we say, in spite, first spite, and despite what the NCC may do or may not do. I mean, we have band launches in June, and the carnival is being launched by the NCC in January or November, or whatever the case may be. So it goes back to fundamental issues of who owns carnival, who is responsible, some of the issues that Dr. Ottley was alluding to previously. And then, of course, the issue of the meaning. What does carnival mean to us? And that we can actually do all three things. So carnival could have socio-cultural meanings. Carnival also has, economic meanings. And of course, there's the politics of carnival. All of those things are in the mix. So that a systems approach to developing this policy. So policy is not something that you just write in a document, as Dr. Johnson was saying, and you put there, and something that academics do. Policy ought to be a living, breathing, walking, talking mechanism. Which is why I started off my talk by saying that we're really talking about sustainability. And in sustainability, we are really talking about what does it mean to us? What do we want to do with it? How important is it? And do we have the cultural confidence to say, this is what it means, and this is what we want to do with it, and this is how we are going to do it? And until and unless we begin to answer as a national community, all of those things, then we run the risk of having a policy where there are gaps, there are chasms, and the issue of sustainability then becomes a real critical issue, especially now.
Yes, and I want to just respond to that. And you continued a point that Dr. Ottley was making, and you framed it a bit differently. You spoke about carnival of the states, the business interests, and the people. I want to frame it a little differently. I want to say public sector, private sector, and third sector, non-governmental groups, etc. And the whole, what I'm hearing from the panelists in different ways is that there's a disparity between the whole idea of industrialization and the idea of heritage/identity and what the meaning of carnival. And I want to pose this question to Keron. How do you think the network, the policy network for carnival, which right now, as Dr. Ottley pointed out, it moved from being a hierarchical structure with the CDC determining what happens with carnival in consultation with the special interest groups, and then moving to the NCC, and the cabinet note, subsequently empowered the special interest groups to have a bit more say in their affairs as it pertains to carnival. What do we need to? I think the next step that I'm hearing from everyone is that we need to rethink, or at least have a discussion about who this policy network is. Who are these network of people that's supposed to be involved in a discussion on the policy for carnival? Obviously, with the underlying assumption that each person from this network comes from with information. They're speaking from an informed perspective. Who, Keron, who needs to be in this policy network?
So let me answer your question in this way, right? You're asking who needs to be in the network, but when I was listening to you and listening to Dr. Burke, I realized that there is the difference between your framing and just how you see it. I want everyone on the call to be very clear about what we're saying, right? The difference between your framing and Dr. Burke's is, you see that third sector that you refer to? Dr. Burke kind of talked about the individual. And there's a reason why for me anyway, I would use a framing that leaves that individual versus third sector, because third sector kind of implies, particularly in international relations speak, when you talk about third sector for the UN, you're talking about civil society, you're talking about organizations, you're talking about people, non-governmental. But you see the role of the individual to totally mash up the thing and to innovate and to change the dynamic, and that is also really important when it comes to
the people.
Thank you very much. So just to put it gently, I think understanding the role of just people in this festival and their say and their stake and their agency is hugely important for Carnival. And this is why that point that Dr. Ottley made about education is so important right now. Again, it's not just about what we write on paper. In practice, our innovation ecosystem for Trinidad and Tobago rests in the Ministry of Education. That's a problem, as far as I see it. I don't know if people recognize it, but the agency that has most responsibility for innovation in the country actually is Niles, and that rests in the Ministry of Education. All of the government, a lot of the government, in terms of the government spend in terms of trying to foster innovation in the society. What it's moved to now, right now, is trying to support innovation out of universities. So it's trying to harvest innovation in that third sector that you're talking about. And this is the practical implications of what this is the practical implications of what you're saying versus what Dr. Burke and I was just saying, right? And it's an important differentiation. I talk about the ability to finance people who never went to school at all in their lives. Right now, the way that the system is set up in terms of, I'm talking from an informed position, just because I used to work for the sake of transparency, I used to work for the Economic Development Advisory Board. One of the things that we did was we set up something called I2I, Ideas to Innovation, where we used to give money for people to take an idea to proof of concept, right? It was supposed to kickstart the innovation ecosystem. The innovation ecosystem right now rests in education, right? And so when the government is funding startups, they've dismantled IBIS, which I'm not going to get into that, as the incubation business ecosystem. That's been dismantled. So what we've moved to now is a system where they're trying to fund innovation through education. And what we're saying is this, right? We need to realize that in terms of the culture of Trinidadians and how we do, in terms of even within rules and not liking rules and those that know how to do things, like in terms of how we behave and in terms of how carnival is done in practice, in terms of how carnival is done in practice, I think the role of the individual is really important. But this also goes back to a greater point as well, in terms of how we talk about it and how we measure what happens in carnival, how we observe it. So this, I mean, I recently spent some time putting together a paper on data as it relates to carnival, data as it relates to festivals in Trinidad and Tobago. Because we don't really do a good job of really observing what's happening, right? So on the one side, we know that, yes, the NCC may not have had a certain amount of institutional resources in terms of skill, a certain amount of human resources, but were they also given the financial resources to do the job that they were asked to do? That's a question. And in terms of how we monitor data, there is right now no method. There is no agreed upon framework for how we collect data with regards to Carnival. What we have is the SODV, which is the survey of departing visitors, which is when people sit down in the airport, waiting to catch their flight, looking at the gate to get on the plane, somebody comes up to them with a clipboard and says, hey, can you answer some questions? That is what we have, and that's how we collect data. I do not know, maybe Kim can tell us. I don't know if we catalog, categorize, and collect and record every design of every costume from every band for every year. I don't know if we do it digitally. I don't know if we keep, if we ask every band for this one. No, we don't. So Kim is shaking his head. We don't. So, so you talk about loss of history, loss of legacy, loss of memory, and loss of data. So when we're talking about what this means to us, no one else is going to do that for us. Let's be very, very clear. And no one else should do that for us. This is our thing. This is our festival. And it belongs to us. It belongs to people. You understand? And I feel that how we talk about it is important. And the point that Suzanne made is so critical about deinstitutionalizing our view of policy, right? And that's a really important point, because people think that policy is between academics and government. It is not. The people write policy every day by the things that they do. And that's what I wanted to put out.
Well, before I redirect to Kim, I just want to respond by saying something. I feel as though we're in a chicken versus egg situation, because when I said, you know, public sector, private sector, and third sector, I envision the third sector as being representative of the voice of the people. And, you know, but you're saying that is a bit different, because the individual needs to have a sense of agency in the discussion of policy. But we just said we had already established in the discussion that the individual has no sense of self. The education system has failed as it pertains to education in Carnival, or fail might be a strong word. It's a bit disjointed. So I feel as though, and I want to quote someone here, Mr. Ulrich Miller, the chairman of the NCC Operations Committee. He made a point here on YouTube. Carnival is several opposing forces attempting to function collectively in an unstructured space. And before I hand over to Kim, I just want to make the point or share my opinion as it pertains to, again, agency of the individual. The individual, at least according to the nature of institutions as we have them now, makes their voices heard through institutions, the individual's voices heard through institutions or through representatives. And I feel as though I didn't understand, Keron, what you were saying as it pertains to the individual having a voice in the policy discussion, but we'll come back to that. I just want to go across to Kim to hear his comments.
Well, okay. I mean, Keron mentioned that I was kind of shaking my head. So there is very little recording. I mean, some was done. So there is some that we have at the Carnival Institute. But generally, we film things, we take photographs, but in terms of the actual measuring and so on, we don't do that. We can't do that because it's expensive. It takes time. It takes staff that we don't have. But also, when you talk about the individual and the people and the masses, you have to realize that one of the problems of Carnival, and in a sense, the vision of the masses of Carnival is about novelty. That has presented a problem for a long time. So, in a way, a policy has to be going against that. The reason why I say that is that, I mean, we have Carnival and we throw away costume every year. Every year we throw away the costume because we think about next year costume. The Calypsonian, the soca man have to come in a new tune every year. Nobody doing cover versions and things like that. That is part of the culture of Carnival. It is, what is the next one? If you are there, you're trying to catalog what happened last year and year before and 5 years ago, you are swimming against that current. I'm not saying there's anything wrong with the current, but you have to bear in mind that a lot of people, they don't see no value in that. And a lot of the same people who think you want to save, you go and say, well, we want this costume or we want to talk about that, and they're not interested. So that is one of the points. I mean, right now I'm working towards developing a carnival museum, which would involve that. It would involve cataloging, it would involve storing and displaying. So things are in the works, but again, people tend to have a very, very limited vision of what this entails and therefore what it costs. People think of a museum as an exhibition. You have some old costume and 2 old pan, 2 drum, and kitchen guitar, and you put it up and you say you have a museum. You have no ongoing research. You have no other inventory other than what on display. You have no vision. You have no links to other museums. All of these things. So we tend to have a very limited, very, very limited vision of what we need, what we want, what is entailed. And to repeat what I first said, that's why I tend to be skeptical about a lot of opinions of policy, because people want to talk policy, you want to talk education. Okay, let's talk education. Right now, the Ministry of Education is one of the fundamental institutions that's supporting the steel band movement, and which is in many ways unsustainable as it currently exists. You have dependent schools, you have all of these things. Children learn, they start in primary school. God knows what they learn. They move on to secondary school. And because of that, that is the reservoir that feeds into the steel bands now. That's why you get in several bands more females than males, because more females than males are doing things in schools. So the Ministry of Education is central to keeping the steel band movement with all of these bands alive. And what they're practicing education the way they, in terms of pan and in terms of music, the way they practice education in terms of everything. You could argue it's almost a 19th century vision. Certainly it's not a modern vision of education, a modern vision of pan education or music education. So what you have is the most important institution for sustaining or creating a situation where it can sustain itself doing it in the most backward possible way. That is the reality we cope with. And I think if you want to write policy or you want to think about policy, you have to be aware of these things. Education, I mean, as I have been involved peripherally or centrally in both universities at undergraduate to graduate level. And the truth is, I found what they teach the kids there kind of largely irrelevant and disgracefully so. I worked at the NCC, I work at the NCC, and I can tell you, I mean, the NCC's vision of their role is essentially, they have to manage these events, you know, people pass this way and they will build something, the North Stand, or they will not build the North Stand, and they'll put up so much portable toilets. And it's that kind of logistics. I mean, there's no thought about the vision or the meaning or anything like that. It's just logistics. You might have a more efficient logistics person or less efficient. And it isn't because the individuals in charge don't have a broader view. Somehow the institution is set up that once you go in there, it channels your thinking in that direction. And I could tell you that because since I've been at the Carnival Institute, there have been 5 chairpersons who were in charge of the NCC, and there were 5 CEOs. And they were very, very different in their interests, in their knowledge, in their background, in their commitment. But they just boiled down very, very quickly to doing the same thing: portable toilets, tents, and North Stand.
Well, let me redirect to Dr. Ottley.
I just want to add a bit on what Kim was talking about in terms of the institutionalization of the arts in relation to education and the NCC. We have taken Carnival to be in such a simplistic, peripheral, non-important activity that the people we select to be involved in the administration of Carnival, unlike being a plumber or a teacher where you train and you have a fundamental understanding of the art of plumbing or teaching, there are people who we give responsibility for Carnival who from the outset may have little or no interest in Carnival. A perfect example I want to bring to mind is in context of the people over the last 30 years we have appointed to be ministers of culture. When you check their academic background, their competency skills, their interests in art or culture or whatever, they lack, most of them lack it. Now, if you have someone coming to your house as a plumber, and he or she has no understanding of faucets and different items, what happens to that job? More than likely, there'll be an error. And therefore, to add that notion and the fact of education, I'm saying we need to, in developing the policy, we need to ensure that the people who administer whatever policy is developed have a theoretical perspective, a theoretical understanding, a historical understanding.
Good time is streaming going.
Otherwise, we'll be spinning top in mud. We cannot again continue to deprofessionalize the art form and the culture of Carnival. We must, as the old folk will say, horses for courses. And we have ignored that fact for the last number of years. So that when we talk about policy, and to add what Kim was saying, if the 5 or 7 CEOs over the last year just fell back into the rut of stands and toilets, it's because, again, most of them may not have had a full understanding and appreciation of the history of Carnival and the importance of Carnival to the society. And therefore, what they've seen is just the end result. They see the 2 days on the street as Carnival. And therefore, their focus will be on ensuring their toilets, ensuring their stands. But Carnival is more than that. And therefore, unless they have that grounding, we're going to be spinning top in spite of all the policies we develop. That's my contribution.
Okay, I'm seeing Dr. Burke with a hand up. Dr. Burke?
Right, and I just want to underscore what everybody is saying in that if you just look to the spend, you look to the money. So I'm looking at some 2016 data. and for the percentage of expenditure on the Carnival Institute as a sum of the total NCC expenditures, 1.7%. Okay, so that just tells you. And when I look at it over a period of time, it doesn't move beyond 2% in terms of the spend. And again, historically, going back to even the Nurse and Nurse report of 1996-97, and I tell people that report was done 5 years after the NCC was set up. And they were flagging some of the same issues, right? In terms of the institution and the institutionalization of Carnival in this kind of limited way. So they were saying 60% of the money that came to the NCC was spent on the festival infrastructure and 40% on services, vendors, et cetera, et cetera. So what you have, and I have been talking about this for a while, is that there's a tendency then in the institution that we set up to be an events management company, right? So what it's really doing is managing an event. What we want is also, at the same time, that has its place, but we also want to develop an industry and to raise people's consciousness about the meaning of the carnival, etc. So I want us to embrace the power of the and. I don't want to bifurcate. I don't want a binary discussion. It's not either or. We need to embrace the ability to do more than one thing well, mastery. Right? And this is why a systems approach is important. So you do have an institution that does the event part of it, but you also need to have the education, you have to have the trade industry and all those kinds of things, the data collection, all of those kinds of things, which is why we're saying you really need a policy that is wide and embraces all of the things we're talking about. And the final thing I want to say, when I say Carnival of the People, inside of there, you have the stuff that you were talking about, Lamar, which is the third sector people, NGOs, and so on. But the beauty of Carnival is that me one, Army one, I could go in town with my costume. I could do whatever. I don't care. I don't have to register. I don't have to, embrace the box that you put me in. And that is the beauty of our carnival, and I would hate to see us lose that. So when I say the carnival of the people, it's all of those dynamics. And I'm saying that to kind of underscore what Ulrich was saying as well. These things, these different interests sometimes work in tandem, sometimes they're in tension. And you really need a policy that facilitates and encourages all of those kinds of things. So I want us to embrace the power of the and. I think we can do it. We just have to believe that we can do it and put the systems in place to do that. And not all of it has to be government. This discussion has been very government-centric so far. And the important thing is that we ensure that what the government can do is incentivize other kinds of players to come into the field. Private sector, philanthropy, etc., that we have other people. So the stuff that Dr. Johnson is talking about, a museum and so on, maybe that is a project for a philanthropic concern that doesn't necessarily even have to reside in Trinidad. But those kinds of discussions, I think we also need to, float.
Okay, thanks so much. I see Keron wants to respond. Keron?
Yeah, here. Sorry, I was just unmuted. Response support, big up, wave a flag. I mean, I think what's really beautiful, in addition to people that come out on every carnival and just do their own thing, I'm not going to repeat what Dr. Burke said, but in addition to that, is when I first started studying carnival, like really intensely, I was kind of blown away by how people just pick up themselves, grab these other people and just start something totally different, like on their own beat. And I found that to be in like stories that we don't really tell that well, in terms of how people utilize their own agency in informal ways and formal ways. Because we didn't even talk about the informality of the sector and what the informal economy actually contributes to the sector every year, and what people do inside and outside of formal institutions. And I feel that is really, really important. And yes, we can talk about the tension between having an NCBA and then somebody forming let me not use acronyms, National Carnival Bands Association, and then somebody forming National Carnival Development Foundation, and and you have these institutions, and you might have tension sometimes. But that's one thing. Who's going to talk about the fact that Trinidad might have their own show on their own beat at their own time? Who's talking about the unbeaten part? And that's why the point I'm trying to drill home here is this, right? Yes, and you're going to hear me talk about data a lot because I'm quite passionate about it, right? It's really hard to measure results if you don't know what you're measuring, and it's really hard to talk about it in a kind of practical way if we're not all talking about the same things. So some people talking about grapes, some people talking about apples, some people talking about oranges. I really believe that the first thing we need to determine is what we're talking about. So even when we did, when the Economic Development Advisory Board started the economic impact assessment of Carnival, which started in 2017, I believe, or 2018. When they decided to do it, the first thing that took, not surprisingly, the first thing that took a long time to actually decide upon was, what is Carnival? What are we measuring? What are you talking about? And are you measuring all the effects that happened before, and how far before? You understand when you talk about Carnival? How far after? How much of the cool down activity do you want to measure? Are we measuring the persons who might belong to certain religious denominations, all the church camps that happen? People go up into the mountains because they don't want to be in the streets. Are we measuring all of that as part of the Carnival economy? When we say Carnival, is that what we're talking about? You understand? Where do you draw the line when you say, I'm not talking about this and I'm talking about that? So part of the issue whenever I engage in a conversation with people about Carnival is that you realize that the thing means different things to different people, which is why I think a conversation about people is also important, which is one of the points I was trying to make. But to kind of really pull several strands from what Dr. Ottley was saying, what Dr. Johnson was saying, and what Dr. Burke was saying, I really feel that part of the what we're struggling with here, I feel is a leadership failure to actually say, okay, guys, this is important. This is what we need. This is what this means to us as a people. And this is why we're doing this. Yes, this is why we are going to take $100 million of your taxpayers' money and invest it or spend it in this way. Because when you use a word like, I've heard ministers talk about invested in culture. When you invest, I expect a return. And you aren't even starting to talk to me about what the return is. You understand? You just say, you're using words like invest because a speechwriter said it would sound nice. What I really need our leaders to do is to be very clear about our carnival, its place in terms of legacy and history and our patrimony and its place in terms of our identity as a people, both for Trinidad and Tobago, for every ethnicity, for all of us, for all are we, you understand? And also, its place in terms of economic viability, in terms of foreign exchange as an economic product. It's not either or, which is part of the problem with the current policy dynamic. I mean, I'm not going to dig too far into it, but the way the policy currently works, and this is after another industry report, the high-level panel on cultural industries that was formed in 2012, I believe, 2011. After that was formed, a decision was made. The panel actually recommended the formation of 6 agencies, 6 companies, of which one was going to be Festival TT. It's in the document, right? They recommended the formation of an organization called Festival TT, which would have responsibility for all national festivals. But the government didn't want to touch, I don't think the government wanted to touch NTC. I don't think they want to touch festivals. So they decided to form 3 of the 6 companies, Music TT, Fashion TT, and they repurposed the Trinidad and Tobago Film Company to become Film TT. Yeah? And so they decided to take those 3 and put them on the trade because they saw those 3 as being income generating and export oriented, right? So they said, okay, those 3 are going to be about economic diversification. The others that they recommended, such including festivals, including heritage, including arts, because they also recommended the formation of an arts TT. Those 3, they said, that's about cultural heritage. That was the policy, that decision that was made. You understand? And the reason why you hear me hammering these points is because now, in practice, when you can't go into the mission trade and say, I want to go on a trade mission to talk about art and to a trade mission, an art trade mission in Belgium, or go to an art expo to sell your art. because the Ministry of Trade is focused on film, fashion, and music. Because we view those as the ones that are good for export. We view the others that are as the ones that are for our cultural heritage. You understand? And it affects how money is spent. I feel like we need to have a discussion that takes the both and approach alluded to by Dr. Burke. The fact that all of them are important to our heritage and all of them can earn foreign exchange.
Thanks so much, Keron. One of the key things that you mentioned is something that I've also been saying, we have a leadership problem, and it's not something specific to Carnival. It has to do with the post-colonial institutional framework that is responsible for governing the country. We see it across sectors where there's a disconnect between policy direction and outputs. And again, what the public is actually looking for, requesting from these different organs of government. But we're running out of time. I just want to pose one question to the panel. It's from Stuart Fortuné. Who is expected to bring the innovation, public or private sector? And how does culture impact on operators' ability to innovate and try new things? Can I focus this on Dr. Burke first?
Okay. I don't know that is, again, I want us to stay away from this notion of the either or, the binarism of these things, yeah? Because when we look, I remember some years ago, I went to something hosted by Lockjack where we brought in people from abroad to talk about innovation. And we are sitting down there, 200 people in a room where we had 14 and 15-year-old boys, Dr. Johnson could talk about that, creating an instrument out of the top of a steel band thing, a garbage can. And we are talking about innovation, like if it's something foreign to us. So the innovation comes from the people. How we purpose that, the institutions that create that, is a whole other discussion that kind of Dr. Niles talked about earlier. But innovation comes from people, and we innovate all the time. Those of us who've ever played maths, they ever see people, what they do with their costume, with their own costume, right? So that there's agency of people to create new ways. But I want us to remember in the 1970s, for instance, as a policy decision, Trinidad and Tobago used to give a prize for innovation in steel band development, which is how we get rocket pan, 9-base, canopies, all of those kinds of things. So there's a role for policy in terms of incentivizing innovation across the board. So it doesn't have to be private sector or public sector. All of us can be implicated in innovating the ways in which we celebrate our culture. Carnival just being one aspect of that. Yeah.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Niles.
Yeah, and so just to kind of back that up, I think post-COVID, that's going to become even more important, right? Part of the carnival is going to be digitized. Part of the carnival is going to be dispersed. I think the idea of investing in our regional carnivals, I think we have like 52 of them all over the country, like looking at like really innovating now is going to become really important until a vaccine and treatment. First of all, we need to finalize the treatment, and then we have a vaccine, and then the vaccine needs to get to Trinidad and Tobago. Until that happens, we will be relying on innovation in a big way next year, right? So I've gotten a couple of phone calls about people worried about events for next year, even planning fêtes, even planning mass, But this is the time to become innovative. And I mean, if this inspires anyone, I hope it does. In terms of what Dr. Burke was saying about people's agency, someone did come to the agency I used to work with in government. And they said, you know what? We want funds to help us to put digital clothes on digital people. I never forget this. And we said to them, there is no way we giving you people hard-earned tax dollars for you to go on a computer and invent clothes for people to wear and expect for us to pay for that. You mad? And they went ahead and did it anyway. And so if you Google mailing Second Life, you will still see up to this day, they close on the store now. You will see up to this day that they paid to have their designs digitized and placed on digital models. And I mean, just tell you, I spoke to the CEO. She said, they did okay. And people bought it. You know, people went and bought this, and so I was just like, wow. And of course, we were like, we're sorry, you know, we should have listened to you, maybe. And part of the load of the state is to facilitate people when they do have these ideas and to help them to scale it. Because if we had more people doing that now, well, guess what? Next year, you could have digitized a lot of the mass, even the parade. And I'm not saying that it's either or. I'm saying it's both and. You will still have people on the streets, you understand? You will still have people doing what they need to do, you understand? And you still have people doing the physical, you still have the traditional wire bending, right? But what I'm saying is this. Innovation is happening. And the state can choose to reject it. The state can choose to embrace it. But when the state does choose to embrace it, they need to help people to scale those ideas so that they can really become global and create new revenue streams. That's how I see it.
Okay, thanks a lot, Keron. Dr. Ottley? Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I'm saying in terms of that whole question of innovation and how we prepare for Carnival next year and beyond, I am very optimistic about my people and Carnival. The state has never done anything to innovate or create for Carnival. All that has come or resulted from Carnival has come from the people, and specifically a certain element of the population, the grassroots people, who through their own location, their own sufferings, their own interest in the art form have always been able to rise to the occasion. So I have no problem with that for next Carnival and beyond. The important thing though for me is still to get back to my initial concern is the when and how and why the NCC Act or any policy governing Carnival was created. Remember 1991, we had just come out of the Black Power movement. And therefore, I'm wondering, was it an attempt to appease a certain segment of the population to say, well, okay, we are allowing you your freedom to do what you choose to do, to be yourself, to identify with your culture and get rid of the state commitment to it. And it goes to my second point. Who is responsible for Carnival in 2020? Who is responsible for Carnival? A simple example. So a photographer from Australia takes a picture of a masquerader. Who's responsible for the copyright of that person? Who protects that individual masquerader? Who takes a song from a calypsonian and plays it wherever, or a run from a panorama song? Who's responsible for it? Who do we get to defend us as the people and as the people involved in the art form? So for me, the two major things, leadership, and get back to what Keron was saying a while ago, in terms of the whole question of leadership. Who is leading the carnival? Who is responsible for the carnival? And therefore, secondly, the people will always come to the point whereby the carnival will go on in the people's way, in spite and despite the policies.
Thanks a lot, Dr. Ottley. Well, we are winding down, so I just want to float one final question to all panelists, starting with Dr. Burke. Dr. Burke, well, I think we have already come to the agreement that discussing policy at this point in time is not the next step. What is the next step as it pertains to the festival? And again, just to use your term, we're not speaking about a binary or bifurcation of industrialization and heritage. What is the next step in reshaping this festival to meet emerging needs and to get us the festival that we want?
Right. I don't know that I should be the person saying what the next steps are, but my view, but my view certainly is that and to go back to what Dr. Niles was talking about leadership, and I think part of the challenge with this notion of leadership is that we're always looking to someone else to lead for us, right? So that we could follow, so followership and leadership. But I certainly think that the people will decide the various groups within the ecology will decide. So there are all kinds of opportunities in terms of spatial culture, repurposing venues. When Keron was talking about the costuming, there are all kinds of opportunities in terms of party wear. I'm looking at things on the web where people are making party wear that have masks and stuff for putting your phone, and they have all the different things. And we are creative people. We are design culture. So there are ways that we could, get into. And I think, the entrepreneurs are really the ones that will probably lead the way. And the people who want to express in terms of how it is going to be possible for us to have the same kinds of community tasks, the same sort of celebrations within community, using this particular moment that would reshape the way in which we celebrate in terms of the spatial culture. So venues that we are going to use, how we are going to space each other, how we are going to come to those venues dressed, right? In terms of the protective wear. I was saying to someone the other day, so we probably need to have designers develop clothes that could be disposable and recyclable, right? With your mask, with your whatever, the whole way in which we consume it is going to be different. And I think the entrepreneurs and the people are going to, policy in a sense always catches up with what is already happening. Yeah. So I think the people will show through innovation what they should do. The role of policy is then just to facilitate what they see, but the policy also has to be self-aware and, as I said, relevant to what is already happening. And I have confidence, as Dr. Ottley said, that we have the people and the expertise and the commitment to develop ways to celebrate that are relevant to the times that we are living in, and reshape it. Look at what's happening all over the world. People are leading. We don't need anybody to lead. We will lead. We will lead and they will follow, right? To transform the ecology.
Thank you, Dr. Burke. Keron, I want to put the same question to you. What's the next step in your mind?
Well, again, I don't like just repeating Dr. Burke. I agree with what she said. But to take that step, to take that one step further, for the people that have called and asked me about mass events, I do think that large scale fetes like we have them with 10,000 people jammed together in the same small space, so we need to innovate. We need to think that through, because regardless of what kind of clothes we invent, we need to think through how we're going to do it. Because a lot of the events are in close proximity one to the other. We also need to think through how it affects our revenue streams. You know, and so I'm going to get a bit specific here. So if you are a musician and you're accustomed getting neighboring rights from people playing music in fetes, what you should know to yourself is that, okay, COT doesn't really monitor social media. So the more fetes you have on social media, it means that you may not get the same amount of money from those events. You are the one, because the state is not going to do that for you. You are the one that needs to think to yourself, how am I going to be impacted by what might come next year, and how can I lead the charge? How can I then innovate my product? So if you are a band leader, if you are a fete promoter, if you are a band, a music band, you need to be thinking about how can I actually innovate my own product and not wait on a grant from the government or NCC to say we're doing this, or anybody else to say that we're doing X, Y, or Z, right? Because I do not think that we're going to update Carnival policy sufficiently in time for COVID to make that kind of rule. It might happen. Who knows? You know, our leaders might become very, very proactive, and they might say, this is the vision, this is what we're doing. That might happen, and it might help. It might happen, and it might make things harder. But for us, what I think is important is recognizing the role of your own agency and your own ingenuity, and not being reliant upon any other body. If indeed Carnival is us, well, now is the time to show it.
Thanks a lot, Keron. Dr. Johnson, we just want to close and remark as it pertains to what do you think are the next steps that we should look at as it pertains to the future of the festival? You're muted, Kim.
Okay, is that better?
Yes.
Right. Yeah. As I say, I mean, my present situation as the director of the Carnival Institute, I'm inclined towards, you know, the next step in terms of developing the research and the understanding and the theory and the data collection and the artifact collection of related to Carnival. And I use Carnival in the broadest sense. Everyone has been speaking about the next steps, you know, in terms of COVID, which is, again, like the NCC, it's a very practical, pragmatic thing, you know, how you go wine if you can't be closer than 6 feet and so on. And that is the trap we fall into. We keep coming back to this very, very practical, you know, which bands should go up Frederick Street or come down Charlotte Street kind of thing. Early on, Keron and Suzanne have been saying, you know, talking about the people and moving away from the leaders. But I think the fact is that our understanding is central to what we do, whether it's policy or as individuals. And that is where the universities and to a sense, the media as well has to step up to the plate. We need proper studies. We need help in archiving, all of that. In terms of what happens as a result of Carnival, I mean, I would decisions like that would have to be taken in the context of the medical people and so on. I mean, bear in mind, in 72, we put off Carnival because of polio. And Carnival was much more central to our identity when Pan used to roll the streets. During World War II, we put off Carnival for 4 years. So, I mean, I wouldn't want to say what we should do in terms of COVID because I don't know. That's epidemiologists.
Sorry to cut you, Kim, but I'm not speaking about in terms of COVID. I'm really asking, where do we go from here as it pertains to really looking at the festival, the evolution of the festival? We already agreed that jumping straight to policy is not the best idea. What's the next step before we reach to a policy?
Understanding. I mean, about 4 years ago, the Ministry of Culture, the Department of Culture did a pretty detailed empirical study of Carnival and effects on how many people go and so on. I think we really need to understand Carnival. And I don't say that very lightly because I think, as I mentioned before, a lot of what passes for an understanding of Carnival is just rum shop talk. It's just old talk. It is not a deep understanding of the components of Carnival. I mean, Pan, Mass, Calypso. 2 out of 3 of them are music. And there's no deep understanding of the music, and not just the music of Calypso and Pan, but the music that was created in the Caribbean, in the New World. Hang on, there's a lawnmower nearby that's kind of, yes, there's not a very deep understanding. It's taught, Pan and Carnival Studies is taught at 2 universities, but I don't know what is taught there. I mean, the vision is not a broad vision. It's we zero in on the narrowest common denominator in everything we do, always. Personally, for instance, I don't think you can understand Pan, and I don't think you could understand Calypso if you don't understand music, if you don't understand Black music. I think you just, again, more rum shop talk, maybe with 2 little facts thrown in. So that's what we need to start. We need to start by understanding what we have, and that is the only way we could move forward. Otherwise, as Suzanne was saying, I mean, the people, they're going to do their things regardless. The only problem is that today they need a little more help now because we are losing things. I mean, how many master tuners do we have? We have Butch Kelman, we have a small handful, and then there are some of them who will not teach anyone anything. You know, Guppy didn't even want to teach his children, his sons, how to do it. So how are we going to pass on? How are we going to develop if we're not passing on anything? I don't know, we like to reinvent the wheel every year, but we reach a stage where we can no longer afford to reinvent the wheel. We can no longer afford to make a new costume every year, because we need to build on the previous costumes. People still coasting on the basis of what Peter Minshall developed, 30 years ago. Mm-hmm. All the fancy things what people win prizes for, Peter Minshall do 30 years ago. Have we built on that? have we studied the technology? I mean, Peter Minshall introduced fiberglass and these kind of huge puppets and all that. Have we studied these to see the relationship between the technology? When Peter Samuel first came out with the sacred and the profane, they got doctors to create a back brace for Peter Samuel because he had a bad back to carry this thing. Already people were bringing in scientists, literally people who made a brace, orthopedic surgeons who made a brace for Peter Samuel. Are we moving in that way? Bringing in the best of the university, the best of wherever, and not just leave it to the people. Peter Minshall, great contribution come because he went to art school. So I think the way forward is to try to understand, and not in a superficial way, and the university and people who have the privilege to study and to read book, and they don't hassle with the routine of going to a job every day and so on. We need the studies. I was speaking a while ago with Ming Lao Chutong, is one of our great musicians. And he said when he went to study in music in the US, they say, Mr. Lao Chutong, what's your music like? And he realized he could not define calypso. I challenge any of you all to define, what's a calypso? How do you define a calypso? We don't, I mean, we know what it is when we hear it. And we'll come to one set of rum shop argument, but that's calypso, that's not calypso. But we cannot define what is a calypso yet.
All right, thank
so
you.
We always spinning top in mud.
Okay, no problem. I want to just tie up with Dr. Ottley now, providing some his thoughts on that same question. What's the next step to your mind, Dr. Ottley, as it pertains to the management and future of the, not management, sorry, but the future of the festival in the hands of the people?
I think we have we can use three approaches. The first one being making use in understanding our archival heritage, and linking that to education. We have a body of work that covers all dimensions of Carnival that our young people may not have been exposed to, our administrators may not have been exposed to, our leadership may not have been exposed to. And also in that vein, adding training to it, where we can talk about the pantuners, the wire benders, and all those different things. So using our history to prepare for the way forward. The second one I'd like to talk about is in terms of the going back to our notion of, and I heard Kim talk about having 6 feet of wine and all those things, but going back to a notion of house parties. Do we really need an all-inclusive fete for Carnival? Do we need that? Do we need to be identified in an all-inclusive fete? Because one of the main reasons, as Dr. Niles' study may have shown, whereby 40% of the people go to fetes, is because what the fete represents. It represents status, it represents being seen on QRC or CIC or wherever, UV fete. And therefore, maybe we need to go back to the day whereby fetting meant with a group of people you identify with common interests in a smaller group and more space. So how do we do that? We talk about the value of family engagement, we talk about household or neighborly engagement, we talk about community, because the Carnival started out of a community. The Carnival and still is, if you look at it in a realistic way, Carnival is not necessarily a national event in the sense that it comes from communities. All of the bands, all of the steel bands and mass bands, they are identified with communities. And therefore, it's an opportunity to do two things. We investigate, share, enjoy, appreciate our heritage, and at the same time, take that information, use it for academic purposes and training, and reinvigorate, rejuvenate community life. And as we prepare for if and when the borders are open or Carnival is whatever happens after COVID. But the point is, it's a time where we have, rather than think about going forward, maybe we need to go backward a bit and therefore prepare for the next stage of it. That's my contribution. Hello?
I think Lamar is frozen.
Hello?
Lamar? Yes, I guess.
So there you go. I mean, so now maybe we might need to innovate.
We might need to lead.
We might need to lead. You know what I mean? These things happen all the time, right? So, but yeah, I mean, I think it was a really good wrap up. To be honest, one of the points that Kim made is one of the points that we've been talking about now for I think the last 3 years about genre formalization.
Keron, you're sounding like a Dalek.
What's that? Can you hear me?
I see you're sounding like a Dalek.
What's a Dalek? What? You're breaking up.
Sounding like you're underwater.
Oh, can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes.
Is that better? Okay.
I think Croissant is also on and not frozen, so he could probably do the needful. Just saying.
Okay, cool. Nothing. Yes, I was just saying briefly that point that you're making there, Kim, about the what is calypso, is a point that we were making about genre formalization, which is really, really critical if calypso is indeed to go global. But Croissant is back on, and so I hand over to Croissant.
Okay, guys. Thank you very much. Really, I must say that I really, really enjoyed the conversation this morning. To go back to, I guess, the words that I brought to mind at the start. A luta continua. Victoria said it, you know, the struggle continues, but as long as we continue to have these conversations and continue to recognize that we, as the people that are responsible for this, our carnival, and taking it to our communities and to the world, victory is certain. Thank you so much to our panelists this morning, our guests from the University of the West Indies, Dr. Suzanne Burke, Dr. Keron Niles, to our very own Dr. Rudolph Ottley, and Dr. Kim Johnson, who though he is no longer resident with us, definitely remains a part of the family. Thank you all, gentle people, for your willingness to spend this time sharing your knowledge, wisdom, and experience. Thank you to Lamar for flying the Master of Arts in Carnival Studies flag high. You really led the conversation in a beautiful way. Thank you to the larger university community, the postgraduate office, corporate communications, the Learning Center. Thank you to our president and board for giving their blessings to proceed. And of course, to our distinguished leader, Professor Hollis Liverpool, for continuing to guide the Academy and particularly our Master of Arts in Carnival Studies in a most progressive manner. Finally, thank you to our audience for joining us today, for sharing the link widely, even after the event is done, you know, keep sharing this link. I think others who need to drink from this font of wisdom and join us on this journey will definitely do well to see and hear what happened this morning. Upcoming webinars at the Academy will focus, I think interestingly, to say today and also adding to some of, we keep building on what is happening, will focus on the legacy and the future of rebellion in Trinidad and Tobago Carnival. That will be led by Dr. Keller. Sorry?
Francis. Keeler Francis.
Right, will be led by Dr. Keeler Francis. And we also gonna have another webinar. Again, it's interestingly linked to some of what we said today with respect to the next steps being a better sense of understanding and education as to what Carnival is. So another one of our upcoming webinars will be an overview of what the Master of Arts in Carnival Studies is. You know, so for persons interested in the program, or even for some of you who are just curious as to what happens in this program, and you know, you can come and join us for that. So please stay in touch with us so you will be informed of these details. Follow the Academy on Facebook or send an email to theacademy@utt.edu.tt requesting to be added to the mailing list. Again, thank you for joining us. Enjoy your holiday. Be purposeful. Don't allow the significance of this day and these times to simply pass you by.